Hello, welcome to Witness. I'm Rageh Omaar. Gaza is in crisis. It's one of the most densely populated territories on Earth, completely cut off from the outside world. There's no money, no jobs, and very little hope. When Israel pulled out of Gaza, Palestinians rejoiced, looking forward to an independent future. Now, the territory seems to be descending towards anarchy. And instead of fighting their age-old external enemy Israel, Palestinians are now killing each other in factional fighting. Despite all this, the one story which dominates Western headlines has been the kidnapping of the BBC correspondent in Gaza, Alan Johnston. I started my journalistic career with Alan and spent many months working in the same newsroom. It was typical of his committed and honourable reporting that he was drawn to isolated and misrepresented parts of the world like Afghanistan and Gaza. It's bitterly ironic that Alan's story has led to the one thing he wanted to avoid, Gaza's tragedy being sidelined. I went to Gaza for the first time exactly 10 years ago, and now I wanted to return, to find out about Alan's story, but also to talk to the people who live there, who are also hostages in Gaza. This is where most journeys into Gaza start and finish, through a long series of caged tunnels, turnstiles, electronic and security barriers. Israel's new multi-million-dollar border post at Erez is symbolic of Gaza's isolation. And despite withdrawing in 2005, it also symbolizes Israel's stranglehold over this tiny strip of land. Anyone or anything that wants to get into or out of Gaza can only do so with Israel's say-so. Despite decades of impoverishment and war, Westerners were treated with respect, somehow above the fray. Kidnapping Westerners was seldom heard of, but all that changed in 2005. One man who knows firsthand about hostage-taking in Gaza is Dion Nussenbaum.
I actually like Gaza a lot. It's beautiful out there. You know, if it wasn't a war zone, it had the potential to be a place, you know, a destination spot where you could go and hang out on the beach and enjoy the Mediterranean.
Dion was one of the first journalists to be kidnapped in 2005.
There had been sporadic kidnappings or attempted kidnappings in years past, but basically in the period during the Israeli pullout was when things started to get a little bit squirrely. But at the beginning, in this period of time, it was what I sort of call, it's what I call catch and release, basically. They would catch somebody for a few hours, hold them, and then they'd be released pretty quickly after negotiations with the Palestinian Authority. And a lot of times in that period of time, the kidnappings had to do with very specific demands that the families were making. They wanted a relative released from prison, they wanted some jobs, they had some grievances.
Dion says the first kidnappings, like his, were born out of a sad desperation to get jobs, money and food, rather than ideology or radicalism.
We're 5 guys in a car and we're driving down the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful afternoon on the beach. And we're driving and a taxi cab, one of these long stretch orange Mercedes taxi cabs, 6 doors, cuts us off. And 5 or 6 masked gunmen get out with machine guns. I get out of the car as they're saying, get out of the car and go with them. My translator tries to come with us. They're not going to let him come, so he comes up to me, we're in the car, and he says, okay, I think you're being kidnapped now. I'm like, yeah, thanks, Ziad, we figured that out. And I still had my phones with me. Adam has his cameras, and we go zipping away. There are now 8 of us packed into this stretch taxi. And within about 5 minutes, it was pretty clear that these guys were amateurs, because we're going along this sandy road, and we reach a little bit of traffic, and they're trying to get around it, and the car won't move over, so they try and cut around it. But it's basically a dune. And so they get stuck in the stand 5 minutes into the kidnapping. Wheels are spinning, big, muscular, you know, militants are like with machine guns, and they're like, the wheels are spinning. Then they spent probably 2 hours trying to find some place to take us. They didn't even apparently have a place to take us because they kept calling people, and I'm sure they were saying, people were saying, no, you can't bring 2 kidnapped Westerners to my house, you know? And they finally found a guy, and so he takes us in, and it's a little house. Like, there's literally a little infant baby sleeping on the cushions in this modest 2-bedroom home.
After only 8 hours, the Palestinian Security Service, Force 17, with the help of his translator, were able to identify Dion's kidnappers, negotiate their peaceful release, and arrest those responsible. The road south from Gaza to Khan Younis takes you across a landscape which reveals Gaza's economic imprisonment. In terms of basic indices, it's a land that belongs more to Africa than the Mediterranean Middle East. According to US government and UN figures, Gaza's per capita GDP is about $800. Israel's is around $28,000 US. This crushing poverty is one of the forces driving unemployed Gazans into the arms of militants. I'd come to Khan Younis to meet this man, Colonel Taysir Jabour, the local head of Force 17. It was he who negotiated Dion's release.
They would kidnap a foreigner and say, I need jobs for 10 of my friends. Once someone said, my house has been destroyed. I want the government to give me money to rebuild it. These were the kinds of demands that kidnappers had. Kidnapping was their way of getting the government attention. Now, at that time, there were a lot of weapons around and security chaos. So we were always nervous.
Taysir says Israeli attacks on Palestinian security forces made things even worse.
There is no doubt that the bombing of the security service weakened us. Bombing us with F-16 created terrible conditions. It weakened us greatly, and it prevents us from doing our job like before. This side that you are now sitting was bombed 4 times by Israelis with the 27 missiles.
So if the security services can't protect themselves, how can they be expected to protect ordinary people? Given the enormous hardships faced by Gazans, you'd expect them to pay little attention to Alan Johnston's plight. The remarkable thing is, they do care. You see pictures of Alan Johnston all over Gaza City, and when you see it for the first time, it's really quite striking. And of course, what it reminds you is that this is the reaction to Alan's case amongst the vast majority of ordinary Palestinians. And what this says, the Arabic script says, Alan Johnston asifun ha'ila laysa minna, which means, Alan Johnston, we're sorry. Those who took you are not from us. And the other reason why it's so striking is you see it amongst the pictures that are much more common all the way through Gaza, in Gaza City and in the towns and cities in this area, which are of the martyrs, those who have lost their lives in the conflict with Israel. And they are absolutely everywhere. They're in some ways the kind of signposts of Gaza and how this conflict has affected families up and down this territory. Western observers often underestimate the extent to which Gaza is a clan-based society. Understanding clan power is key to finding the men who kidnapped Alan Johnston.
The situation is now very serious. As you can see, I've been dressed in what is an explosive belt, which the kidnappers say will be detonated if there's any attempt to storm this area. They say they're ready to turn the hideout into what they describe as a death zone.
I travel to the heavily guarded neighborhoods of the Dughmush clan in Gaza City. It's a measure of the power of the Dughmush clan that streets in their area have been cordoned off with concrete blocks and burnt-out cars, giving it the feel of an urban fortress. Sheikh Salah is the clan head of 5,000 men, most of whom carry weapons, and he granted me a rare interview. I asked Sheikh Salah what he would say if Alan Johnston's father was with us in the room.
I would tell them that I totally felt for them, that if my son had been kidnapped, I would also feel devastated. These things are unacceptable.
But he also felt that there were double standards.
The Israelis arrest people left, right, and center using the excuse of terrorism. Half of them don't have lawyers, and often no charges are filed. When one Westerner seems to be under threat, the whole world stops and pays attention.
The kidnappings in Gaza may have begun with simple demands for money and jobs, but they have also been carried out in the name of ideology. In the far south of Gaza, I arranged to meet men who have kidnapped in the name of politics, not profit. They were nervous, not because we were filming, but because 24 hours earlier, one of their commanders had been assassinated in an Israeli missile attack. I spoke to the head of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, Alan Johnston, who briefly came out of hiding to speak to me about his kidnapping of British aid worker Kate Burton and her parents in 2005. He now believes it was a mistake.
Tactics were used that we now consider not well thought out and unsuccessful. These were moments of desperation. When people are drowning, they hold on to a thread, and I think the kidnappings were an expression of that. It was misguided thinking.
Alaa says he now believes kidnappings damaged the Palestinian case, but I asked whether he felt responsible for giving rise to the practice of kidnappers using the Palestinian cause as a smokescreen when the real motive was money.
In the absence of the rule of law and the governing body that can apply that law, non-stop Israeli attacks, destruction, assassinations, and imprisonment. What do you expect the conditions here to be? Secure and prosperous? It's natural that under these conditions, chaos rules. Every time we are about to return to the rule of law by rebuilding the security services, the Apaches return, the warships reappear, and the assassinations resume. The Zionist camp is working very hard to keep us in disarray, chaos, and without security.
Whilst Western headlines are often dominated by Western hostages in Gaza, after the break I see how many Gazans have been victims not just of the kidnappers, but of an economic embargo which many say is holding all of Gaza hostage. Join me there.